I was sent a video of the Young Turks by someone on Facebook, and they essentially said to me, the gist of what Cenk Uygur is saying is that the leader of North Korea should be assassinated, and that while he was being visited by the South or the next meeting with Donald Trump, he should be assassinated. Now, obviously, Cenk Uygur is a liberal, and liberalism is a rightist ideology, whether they like to admit it or not. But think about what we have here. I have said this before about Cenk Uygur, and I will say it again. He's good on talking about domestic issues, but once he starts talking about anything outside of America, he has no idea what he's talking about. Like, none. And this, unfortunately, is the main problem with war. It happens internationally. So, for the entire presidency of Bush, we have complaints about the war. The war is wrong. We shouldn't be in Afghanistan. We shouldn't be in Iraq. All of which is perfectly true, and liberals were very happy to parrot that correct line, thankfully, because it was correct. And then they mysteriously disappeared when Obama got elected. Now, around the end, when it became pretty clear that Obama was really actually worse than George Bush when it came to wars, then they started turning around the end. But then they started really cheering for Hillary Clinton to win the next election, because it's not like she was involved in many of those wars to begin with. In other words, when it really comes right down to it, liberals and rightist ideology in general does not care about the negative effects of what a presidency does, as long as it doesn't affect them. So they talk about how they're anti-war. They talk about how they're anti-violence. Yet, as soon as it comes up where one of the candidates is quote-unquote progressive, like Hillary Clinton, they talk about how, it's going to be a new day, when really her track record with war is just as bad as Obama's. So in other words, the whole anti-war issue just mysteriously disappears as soon as it's beneficial to them. Now, we know Bernie Sanders' positions. He's a defender of Israel, etc. And this Israel is one of the worst regimes in the entire world and has been literally committing a genocide for decades. And there is Bernie Sanders sucking up to them. And I don't believe that's because he's Jewish. I believe that it's because he's part of the political establishment. So, we have Cenk Uygur going ahead and advocating the murder of a leader of a foreign country, which I believe is actually illegal. But, let's put that aside for a second. Think about what's being said. This country should have its leader assassinated, be thrown into total chaos, and be forced regime change, all for what? Cenk's ego? I mean, we can't in any way claim that somehow North Korea is exploiting the United States. The United States has very openly and for decades been oppressing the DPRK by placing sanctions on them. There's a reason why sanctions go one way. There's a reason why it's from the U.S. to the DPRK and not the other way around. The United States in no way, shape, or form can ever, with a straight face or an iota of integrity, say that the DPRK has been a threat to them, has done anything wrong to them, etc. I mean, it's very clear. The DPRK doesn't have troops massed in Mexico with weapons aimed at the United States. It's the United States with weapons inside of South Korea aimed at the North. This is all because the DPRK, whether you like them or not, holds out against U.S. imperialism. And that's entirely what this is about. This is about the United States not having control over the DPRK the same way that it has control over the South, or the way that it arguably used to have it over Iraq, Afghanistan, and many other countries. That's what liberals fail to understand. They will accuse George Bush of trying to create an empire. Because I remember that when in the last few years of his presidency, it's about the American empire creating this, creating that. That empire already existed. That empire has existed for more than 100 years. There's a reason why. You know that statistic that the United States has existed for 233 years, and at 220 of those years, it's spent at war. And that's because They were building an empire. If it wasn't an internal conflict for the stability of the country, then it was the annexation of land, the annexation of resources, spheres of influence, etc. The United States is an empire, and that did not begin with George Bush, nor did that begin with Obama, nor does it begin with Trump. But this whole reality is just completely ignored by liberals. They give all this concern for war. They don't want this to happen. Oh, we don't want the Palestinians to suffer. Then as soon as something like Hillary Clinton comes up, and it's going to be good for them because she's talking about possibly, maybe letting us be able to see a doctor, or maybe we might be able to get marijuana. And then all of a sudden, all those concerns out of the people that are slaughtered on a daily basis by the United States are completely forgotten about. And this is one of those aspects that I always like to hit about third worldism. That essentially, in the end, first world people do not care about the people they oppress and exploit in the third world. The average American does not care. Many of them will feign compassion if it's politically useful to attack the party that won't live up to their interests, like the Republican Party does. But when it's going to give nice soft concessions, like the Democratic Party seems to be willing to do, then all of a sudden, all that concern about the war and slaughter just mysteriously disappears. And that's a fact. And that's the thing about first world people. Their living standards are so high, mainly because of exploitation of the third world, that they are unwilling to have any kind of serious class consciousness when it comes to this. The old saying by Marx, workers of the world unite, something that is echoed by first world people, a lot of first world Marxists, but then that just completely gets forgotten about. And even many of the more radical liberals will even say the same thing. This is a class problem across the entire world. Yet as soon as we have this situation, suddenly they just forget about the other 99% of the world. Now, I've looked up the statistics, and you can go to Global Rich List, etc. If you make $35,000 US a year, you are literally the 1% of the entire world. Now, I should mention that even the average income of an African American in the United States is about that. Now, I know that's I'm going to get called racist for pointing that out, that even the average black income is equal to that of 1% of the global community. I know that's automatically racist because you can't actually point out, statistics and facts. Oh my God, you're racist for saying it's racist to point out statistics and facts. Okay, well, you don't get to argue with that. You don't get to argue with the reality of income distribution in the world, because this is one of those really materially existing things. So think about that. Even the most marginal, no, I say second most marginalized group, I say Native Americans have it worse than American blacks. But look at that. And that's just a small example of the privileged sections of the United States. And because of that, we get to begin to understand a lot more of why there's no global class consciousness in the United States. The liberals will tell you all day long the bosses make too much money and the workers should make more, and then they argue all these economic things like, well, if you have a higher minimum wage, people have more disposable income, it will go into the economy and stimulate, etc. I'm not confirming or denying that to be true. I'm just saying that they're making that argument. They're not really saying that the system on a global scale is wrong. They're really only out for themselves. And that's really what it is that makes liberalism a right-wing ideology. Conservatives will say straight up, they don't care about anyone, they don't care about anything. Lofty words about the Bible, but in the end, they'll violate the Bible all day, every which way, because they don't really care, because they're hypocrites. The difference is that liberals feign like they care. There's the old saying, liberals, 2 steps to the left when something affects them, but 2 steps to the right when it doesn't matter to them at all, or when it goes against their interests. And that's kind of the point. And that's kind of the point that I like to make about global class. And Cenk Uygur is a significant manifestation of that. He doesn't really care about anything but his own interests. I remember him saying one time many years ago, "Would I like to be rich? Hell yeah, I'd like to be rich." So he's already saying that he wants to be part of that very class that he says has too much money and has too much power in society. We need to get rid of the super PACs, etc. So we can see the complete and total hypocrisy right within Cenk Uygur just for that. And that's just the comment that I wanted to make on Cenk Uygur saying is something as horribly obnoxious as saying Kim Jong-un needs to be assassinated. That's something the United States should do. It's not like the United States has a very bad history of carrying out assassinations of foreign leaders that don't serve U.S. interests, and that advocating that the United States do so to the DPRK is essentially just a continuation of that pattern. So much for the anti-war stance. But, I digress. I already went over that. So that was just my response to Cenk Uygur and the person who asked me for my opinion in the video. And I want to thank you for that, because that was a pretty good one. Now, normally I would never watch a Young Turk's video, because why? Just take basic liberalism and apply it there, and you've got the same thing. You don't really need to see anything. But this one, I felt it was necessary because Cenk Uygur was so blatantly calling for a right-wing interventionist, imperialist policy, while claiming to be part of the resistance.
Thank you for watching. If you like this program, then please head over to my Patreon page and set up a monthly donation. It's your donations that keep this program running. Also, if you would like, please rate, comment, subscribe, and share in various social media.